hopefully Diane can join us here shortly. One of the rules that John Welch reminded me of, and I kind of knew this before, but I forgot about it. When you're doing these online meetings, we're supposed to announce ourselves when we start speaking. So when you do that, please announce yourself so we know who's talking. The other thing that's kind of cool is you go up to your top right-hand corner of your screen, you find a circle there with a little, looks like a cube. It says chat. If you move your mouse over it, when we're voting, we did that today, and it worked pretty good. When we were voting or making a motion, we were just making the motions and vote through chat. And then we see who's voted, who hasn't, and how they voted, so we don't have to go through that roll call like we were doing at the council meeting. We won't have any votes tonight because this is a workshop. We just kind of get you familiar with some tools that I'm seeing that are working pretty well for other meetings. And then one good announcement for everybody to know that WAPO did approve the additional $1.3 million funding for the Woodlawn project today. So that is now money to go forward with that project. So that'll just bring us back up to the 80% of the construction cost, which is what we were going to do. So that's good. But we'll go on and get started then, unless somebody has any other introductory remarks. I know that Ted has got the utility rate study to present to us, so we'll let Ted take over from there, and we'll go from there. All right?
Yeah, and thank you. And before I start, Jeff, you are upside down on the video for the citizens, so you might. What's that?
He's not upside down here.
I'm not upside down on my thing.
He's not upside down. Must be you, Ted.
Well, yeah, that's there. That's a little better. That's straight. That's sideways now. I just don't want it out on YouTube with you upside down the whole time. But
no, let me see what I can do here.
Sorry. Okay.
Right side up to me.
I don't know. Hey man, you set this thing in this case.
Yeah, you might flip it in the case, or.
I don't know how easy it is.
Anyway.
It's setting for you. This is correctly.
Doesn't quite allow me. We'll keep working on it. I'm just here to present Nicole Franken. She's from PEC, and I think we're going to go with their presentation first, and then you can have any questions you want with Nicole, and then I think I'll just take it immediately after and kind of tell you what the Utility Advisory Committee and I discussed for several meetings, and then we'll open it up to general questions for both Nicole and I. I think that'll work because there might be some answers that I give that will answer some of your questions to kind of speed things along here. But I'm going to give over the presentation power to Nicole, and she'll be able to show her PowerPoint or anything she wants. So.
All right, so can you all see that?
Yes.
Okay, so hopefully I can keep you guys from falling asleep in your chairs there. It's going to be a lot of spreadsheets tonight, so I'm going to try to go through this as quick as I can without skipping over too much. So if you have any questions, like Ted said, let us know. So basically what we did was we were hired by the city to look at the water, sewer, and stormwater rates to required to generate enough revenue to meet the city's future financial needs. And we also looked at a potential alternate stormwater rate structure that we consider to be fair to all types of customers and meet the city's projected financial needs. So in order to do that, we looked at historical data relating to the number of customers, water and sewer usage, and the revenues and expenditures for each type of utility. And then we projected the number of customers through the planning period, which was for this rate study 2020 through 2024. And then we used the projected number of customers and usage to determine what the revenue was going to be, and projected out expenditures to figure out what the rate should be. So the first thing that we did was look at historical number of customers by customer category: residential, commercial, bulk water, and city. And we looked at different growth rates. We looked at your guys' comprehensive plan, and we determined a 2.5 growth rate for residential, 0.23 for commercial, and then we assumed that the bulk water and city usage or non-revenue water would remain constant. And based on those growth projections, we projected out the number of meters basically for each of those customer types through 2024. We looked at the historical usage by customer type and broke it down based on the number of customers to figure out what the monthly usage by customer type was in each of those years, and then the average. And then we used those figures to determine the projected water usage for each of those categories. So as you can see, residential is obviously the highest user, followed by commercial, but the majority of it's residential. We then looked at historical revenues. For the water utility, the majority of the revenues came from the water sales, with the income from the base rate and the usage-based rate being almost the same. The usage-based rate brought in more money, a little bit more money for the water utility. And then for the sewer utility, we did the same thing, except for the residential base rate made a little bit more money than the usage charges. So then we had a basis to look at our future revenue projections and make sure that it matched up and there wasn't a giant jump or too little of a jump based on historical trends too. And then we looked at stormwater utility historical revenues. Since this fund was started in 2016, there wasn't too much that was accumulated there, but then it steadily increased in 2017 and 2018. We then looked at historical expenditures, and for the water utility, we broke out the contractual line items by fixed and variable. Fixed meaning not dependent on the amount of water used, and variable meaning dependent on the amount of water used. And so that this line item, contractual variable, is entirely associated with the purchase of water from Wichita. So, you guys bought $575,000 worth of water from Wichita in 2016 and so on. So we do that to kind of get a feel for you have fixed and variable water rates. So to see, if the majority of your income is coming from fixed rates, but the majority of your costs are variable, it's not quite a good fit. So we weren't looking at rate structures for changing rate structures for the water and sewer utility, but it's something that's always good to look at. So we did the same for the sewer utility historical expenditures, except for we didn't break it out because most of those are considered fixed costs. And then for the stormwater utility, we basically, there was no expenditures in 2016 since that's when the fund was started. They just started spending a little bit of money in 2017 and 2018. We then looked at the reserve funds for each of the utilities. The reserve fund is the amount of cash that's not intended to be used for anything in there. And generally we look at what should be in reserve funds based on how much risk a utility has. So if a utility has a lot of contractual obligations or debt service, then we generally recommend higher reserve amounts, or if it's pretty low risk, if it's just basically no O&M, like the stormwater utility and capital expenditures, then you don't need as much money in the bank for backup. So in the report, we recommended half a year's worth of expenses for the water and wastewater utility and a quarter of the year for the stormwater utility. That's something that Todd will probably touch on during his discussion. The next thing that we're going to look at is the future costs and revenue. So as part of the rate study, we sat down with city staff and talked through future improvements that they're planning on doing, and put together some preliminary sketches and more broken down cost estimates to go over with them to establish the projected costs for each of these projects. And then we discussed priorities and put years associated with that. Depending on how things go, if you guys bring in less money than expected and it can wait a year, you guys could consider bumping these or moving them up. But we just wanted something to base what we set the rates for, so that you have planned maintenance instead of not planning for those costs and waiting until things start breaking and you don't have enough money to cover it. For the projected water expenditures, we had to make some assumptions on the growth and expenses, and we looked at the historical growth and expenses and got some city input on these. The big one for the water expenditures is the variable contractual expenditure category. We assumed 10% annual increase due to the expected rate increases from Wichita for the new Northwest Water Treatment Plant. And the basis for that was partially to be a little bit conservative, but also we looked at their WIFIA funding applications, and we've been in discussions with them with other cities on their contract renewals and stuff like that to try to get a feel for that number. So that may change, but I feel like that's a good number. You always want to aim higher on expenses than lower so that you're covering yourself. For the projected water expenditures, we then took those growth rates and projected out through 2024. And then we looked at those revenues compared to expenditures and what the fund balance would be at the end of each year based on what you guys do now, a 3% annual increase. And you can see the fund balance in 2024 would be about a third of the expenses for that year. A third of expenses, which is less than what we're recommending, but it's still a pretty good chunk in the reserve. So in order to meet that half a year's worth of expenses, you would need to raise the rates 4.5% annually. And that would get you a little bit over the target fund balance. For the projected sewer expenditures, most of those were the same for staff expenses. The big thing here was the projected debt service amounts for the CCUA wastewater treatment plant improvements, and we sat down with CCUA and talked through all that and their current debt service projections for their current debt to make sure that that was all accurate. And so then we projected out through 2024 for the sewer expenditures for each of those line items. And then we compared that to the revenues for a 3% annual increase in rates. And you can see in 2024 with what you guys are doing now, 3% annual increases, you'd still be at a little over a quarter of a year's worth of expenses, but not quite what our goal is based on our recommended reserve amounts. So in order to meet our recommendations, you would have to increase 5% annually instead of 3%. So we looked at the stormwater expenditures next. There wasn't much to those. It's basically NPS permit sampling costs. And then we projected out through 2024 based on that, and then the CIP items improvements that we were looking at on the previous slide. And based on the current rates, if you didn't change anything right now, the fund balance would be just a little bit under what our target is for the stormwater. But if you wanted to change stormwater rates, we evaluated the ERU-based stormwater rate structure, which is what a lot of cities use to try to make it more equitable between customers. So it's based on impervious surface area, which is a way to measure each customer's stormwater runoff contribution. So if you have two parcels that are exactly the same size and one is all concrete and one is all grass, the person with more concrete is going to contribute more to runoff and to needing bigger sized stormwater lines and all that kind of stuff. So that's the idea behind this rate structure. It's broken down into 3 categories: exempt, residential, non-residential. Exempt would be, like city properties or other places that you wouldn't want to charge stormwater fees to. And in order to implement this rate structure, the city would need to define these in an ordinance or something of that sort. We looked at doing a flat rate for residential customers and a tiered rate for non-residential customers. And the non-residential customer tiers were based on equivalent residential units, ERUs. We determined the city's ERU to be 3,230 square feet. So the next slide, you kind of see where it breaks down the number of properties into each of these buckets of impervious surface area, and the majority of properties are 3,000 to 4,000 square feet of impervious surface area. Then this next table shows, the majority of properties are in that first tier, up to 3,230 square feet. Sorry. So then we set the stormwater rate structure based, the residential basically the same, that flat fee as it is now, and the first 2 commercial tiers at that same rate to kind of minimize the impact of the change. But then we based the other tiers on the ERUs, like basically $1 per ERU. And that rate structure gets you to where you need to be for the target fund balance in 2024. So on these next few slides, I'm going to show water, sewer, and stormwater rate comparisons. And the big thing to think about here is that it's not necessarily comparing apples to apples. Some people defer maintenance on things, and they might keep their rates down artificially low because of that. Some people might be supplementing from their other funds to their stormwater, water, wastewater funds. So while you can see where you're generally at in relation, what the customers would probably be looking at, it's not always the full picture. So what we did was we looked at the residential user and commercial users by typical smaller usage and larger usage for the city to see where they would fall out compared to other cities. And then same thing on the sewer rate comparison. The big thing to note here is that the KDHE is going to be coming out with nutrient removal or nutrient limits for most cities. And so I know that Derby and Wichita are just starting the process of doing preliminary engineering reports or design basis documents for implementing major upgrades for those limits and also for deferred maintenance. So the rates are going to be going up. And then for the stormwater rate comparison, really for that, Bel Aire looks pretty good comparatively, but it's one of those things that you don't know necessarily why, per se, unless I dug into it more, why Valley Center is charging that much for their stormwater rates if they're trying to raise their reserves or whatever they're trying to do. So in conclusion, we would recommend, based on our reserve recommendations, that water rates increase 4.5% annually and sewer rates increase 5% annually. We recommend that you guys implement an ERU-based stormwater rate structure to make it more equitable between customers instead of just a flat rate for people with different lot sizes and different amounts of impervious surface area. One thing that I didn't touch on in the presentation, but as a big point, is that the city should start to look into modifying the agreement with Park City that establishes minimum take or pay amount for Bel Aire. Basically, you guys have to sometimes pay for water that you're not using because you have to either use it or pay for it a certain amount. And then we recommend that you guys review annual or actual expenses and revenues compared to the projections and from the rate study to revisit rates as required. And one of the things that I have on my calendar is later this year to sit down with Ted and update my spreadsheets and show him what I do so that he can modify it going forward. So with that, I'll turn it back over. If you guys have any questions, let me know.
Mr. Mayor, I have a couple of questions. First question that I had was around the reserves. You referenced the 50% recommended reserve. What is it about the 50% number that makes that an ideal target reserve amount? It seems like a really big percentage for a reserve. I know when we think about our city's budget, Tanya talks to us a lot about a 30% reserve for our city's budget and that being the gold standard. Can you help us understand, I guess, how does the 50% come into play? How do you come up with that, and what makes that the recommended, fund reserve?
Yeah, so the reserve amounts that you have right now, that 30% or 25, those are good reserves. But the reason why we recommended a higher amount in reserve is because such a large chunk of your expenses are contractual obligations and debt service that, if you guys hit a rough patch where you weren't selling as much water and you were having to pay a lot because you weren't using as much water with those take or pays on both the Wichita side and the CCUA side, you want to make sure that you're meeting all your contractual and debt service obligations. So that's kind of a subjective thing. If you want to hit some spot in between there, it's really where the comfort level is with city staff and the council as to how you guys determine that. But that's kind of typically what we would recommend for that much percentage of your expenses being contractual obligations or debt service.
Okay, and then maybe my follow-up question to that is maybe for Ted, around the city's 30% reserves. When we think about a reserve and it's only for these two funds that we're looking at as part of this study, and if we have a 50% reserve in those two funds, can you help me understand how the reserve balance in those funds contributes to the overall city's reserve fund balance? Are those thought of as completely separate, or if those are above the 30%, the 50% level, and then we had other funds that had below the 30%, would we still be looking at our overall reserve balance, holistically across all of the funds? Can you speak to that just a little bit? Does my question make sense there?
It does. We talk about the general fund almost all the time. 1 second, let me flip to active cameras so the people at home. So we talk about the general fund all the time, and that has that 30% reserve on it. A lot of our minor funds don't really keep that 30%. Because a lot of them are, like our PBC fund is pretty much we transfer in money to pay the debt that goes out of that fund. So we don't keep a reserve in that fund. As far as the holistic point, it's audits and the state of Kansas see the water and sewer, stormwater. There are enterprise funds, utility funds that should be operating a business-like activity, meaning they generate the funds needed to provide the service. We can't use a water fund to supplement the general fund or any other fund that's considered governmental funds. So there's a real divide. Even we account for them differently. These are all accrual-based funds, just like any business. And then our governmental funds are modified accrual, which is a different type of accounting. We won't get into that. But yes, when we consider the enterprise funds, that is completely separate from the 30% reserve. We don't have a across-the-board reserve requirement in our comprehensive financial policy. I don't think anybody does because it just wouldn't be practical given the example. Trying to figure out how to share my camera exclusively, but I think people at home can see that I'm talking. So I can go in a little further. There's one thing when we talk about utility rates is there's nobody in the city that understands and wants rates to be lower than me and my staff, because we get to field all the questions and all the different customers' questions and complaints on a day-to-day basis. And what I was trying, and I might share my screen to go through my little spiel. Everybody still on? Okay.
I'm still here.
What I'm trying to do is to kind of bring it all together. PEC did a great job. They spent as much as time with me on the financial side as they did with Ann on the capital improvement for utilities side, which was much needed. If you can think back to budget cycles, what we do is we take care of our debt service payments, what kind of maintenance payments we owe to CCUA, the operations of Bel Aire. If you also remember back to Ann's presentation during the new council member orientation, you'll notice that all the water that comes into only comes to our borders that we purchase. We have to maintain all the lines inside the city, and that's what our public works staff does for the city of Bel Aire. So any main break you hear of, that's the city staff going and take care of it. And any, the source of the water or the source of the treatment is outside our borders. So a lot of our budget is concentrated on paying for those two services. And then when we talk about maintenance, as far as maintenance on the pipes and different water and sewer mains, what we've been doing lately is say, hey, let's lower our reserve down to 50% or so and do some projects. What that kind of creates is, what's the worst pipes we have? Let's take care of them right now. There's no really plan. What PEC did when they sat down with Ann is to create a plan, and that's kind of reflected in their 5-year forecast, and why it's a little higher than usual, because we're putting these expenses into the plan. Now, we have complete discretion over that plan. So if we see any kind of downtick in revenues, we can hold off on some of that maintenance and shore things up. So I don't want you to get too scared about, rates are going up. I want to squash that because we're in control of the rates. But it's important to do these studies so that we can come away with one. PC gives me the tools to perform pretty much the same study year in and year out for the city, and also work with Ann because they have engineers and she's an engineer to address our needs. As far as my presentation, and I kind of went over that first bullet point on municipality management, we look at debt service payments. That's CCUA debt service, and also a few smaller GO bonds that we had to do for the water and sewer utilities. Maintenance, I went over that. A lot of these costs we don't control entirely, so we end up paying them. Like Wichita, this year they raised their rate 6%. We projected 10% in this. Like Nicole said, we're a little more conservative on that. And then we create the budget. Let's talk a little bit about what happened in 2013, because I think it's very, very important to think back. We're not in the same situation that we were in 2013 at all. In 2013, our fund balance was going negative the next year. That's a dire situation on rates. And what they ended up doing is coming back with a proposal, and we followed it. The council followed it. It was a mid-year price increase of 6%, and I kind of have it if you can see it on my board. I just want to show you, we kind of did a lot of this hard labor back in 14 and 15, so that we're at the spot we are right now, where if you kind of look through my report is where we have a little bit larger ending balances, over 50% we ended in 2019. So the 2013 study really did its job. It's just this is looking five more years down the road when now that we know CCUA is going to build a new sewer plant, and how are we going to absorb this cost and making sure we don't have a price increase like we saw in 2014. A few areas of concerns that when I got to the city, I noticed, we pay a lot of equipment, and the water and sewer utilities first started contributing to the equipment reserve fund in 2019. I think that's a good policy because they use a lot of equipment as well. I touched on the future needs to upgrade, and then, of course, the Wichita water facility. We did renegotiate those rates a few years back, the take-or-pay rate anyway. So we are giving less money to Wichita, but as Nicole said, one of our recommendations would be to go to CCUA and try to lower that amount as well. Nicole had a good comparison, but I just wanted you guys to kind of see my comparison. We all know that Wichita water rates, or that Bel Aire rates are high, but they're not drastically higher than some areas in the city. This is my family's. I took our bill and just kind of plugged in our numbers for us and a few other areas. I hate doing this because El Dorado got in a big trouble because they don't fully understand other people's rate structure. Some people charge by the cubic yard instead of gallons. So I don't write the broadcast any of this stuff too much because it's kind of like saying, look over there, I'm not trying to say that. I'm just trying to show you guys it is a concern to residents, so I think it's important to look at it. One thing that I learned really quickly when I first started my career is every city is different. Valley Center, they live in a valley, so yeah, their stormwater fees are going to be a little higher because they got to build a lot more ways to run that water throughout. If you have a city on a hill, you're going to have a few more lift stations. So geography plays a huge deal in what your water rates are and how they're done. Wichita doesn't have a single provider for trash service, so I think that is something that we gain ground on Wichita with, whereas a resident might not include that with their Bel Aire bill. They might just be used to paying Wichita water and sewer rates and then come to Bel Aire and say, wow, I'm paying a lot more, but they don't associate the total utility bill that we call it, whereas that includes trash that you only pay $16, whereas in Wichita you might be paying $100 every 3 months or a little more. So it's always something to look at. I don't try to focus in on the rates, but in comparisons wise, but it's just, and I put a few things in. It's about $110 for my wife and I's cell phone, and a date night with 3 kids. The babysitter gets a majority chunk of that, but it's about the same cost as a Bel Aire water would be. So the positives that I saw coming out right now is our water and sewer utilities have sizable ending balances right now, and that's really what the Utility Advisory Committee and myself, we talked extensively about what should we do. Should we go ahead and recommend the adoption of these higher rates? And for me, because we now have the tools and we understand where we're going, I really, what UAC, I'd rather report to UAC every December what our fund balance is doing. Are we dipped below the 50%? Should we be gradually raising rates or not? Instead of looking at a forecasted model and just raising rate based on the forecast, even though we have 70% reserves today. I think that's a little bit more of a responsible route because the expenditures become known the closer you are to them, meaning what a forecast does is they'll say contractuals or something, water rates are going up 10%. Well, they only went up 6% this year, so we saved some money there. So what I'm trying to do is basically do a utility rate, 5-year utility rate study every December for the UAC and for you guys if you want. And then we have a better snapshot, a live snapshot of where rates need to be in the next 5 years. I'm not proposing that it won't go up. I'm just saying let's wait one more year because we have the sizable ending balances currently and see where we're at on revenues versus expenditures on actual side versus the projected side. We can look at UACs, and here's kind of what I was showing, and Nicole showed hers as well. But this was, right, we ended 2019, and this is unaudited numbers, about 1.7 in the water utility, which is 70% reserves, and then in the sewer, about a little over $2 million, which is about 88% of reserves. So we have plenty of reserves to weather any storm for the net foreseeable future, and that's why I wanted to say I would recommend us not touching utility rates at this time, but going forward, I'll report to the Utility Advisory Committee and to you guys on what we did. I usually do every budget cycle to you guys, but the Utility Advisory Committee really wanted to hear that as well. We'll touch on this and then we'll open it up to questions. And really the benefits of a 5-year fiscal plan, that's what I tried to explain to you guys, is where I'm going to be doing pretty much a rate study every December for the Utility Advisory Committee. We're going to look at where we're at on growth-wise. We might grow more than 3% on a year. That has effects of our rates because more people that are hooked up to the system, the better it is. Much like Wichita, they have huge numbers they can draw. That's why their rates are where they are at. They put in projected 2021 rate change. I don't know if I 100% agree with that, but I think they are looking forward and saying, hey, we don't know what the actual cost of this CCUA sewer plant's going to be, and that's really going to judge a lot of the sewer rates. I think water, as Nicole said, we're still upright at the end of 5 years by $1 million, but the sewer's what we're really going to watch closely on, how much this new plant's going to cost and how it's going to affect the city of Bel Aire. And again, I'll say again with what Nicole said, let's sit down with maybe Park City and CCUA and see what we can do about this 1.5 million take or pay we have. There's also some other nuances you can do. And one of my projects, and I'll probably present the equivalent residential units for commercial on a separate report so that we can really dive into it. Right now, you take, and I'm going to use an example, like Epic Sports pays $10 a month in stormwater, but has a 1 million square foot building. I love those guys, but sometimes in other communities they'll pay a little more for the stormwater because they're diverting a lot more water. And we can talk about this later, but UAC kind of adopted that as well. I want to give them their due. So right now, I'll open up the questions. I know I talked a little too much, but I wanted to kind of give you our side of things and then PEC's side, and then we can kind of come together and do it.
Ted, thank you. Thank you, Nicole, for your presentation. I do have a couple of questions. By the way, this is Jim. I didn't introduce myself before I speak. I'm trying to get in that habit. So the sewer plant that CPUA is looking at, there are current engineering estimates for 12 million, and you have this plan 13 million, which is a good way to do a conservative estimate. But that's where it is today. So that's a good thing. I'm a little curious on this take or pay issue. We'll renegotiate that with the city staff, but what are the thoughts on the renegotiation with Park City? Are we taking less water from them on a take or pay? Is that increase the per unit rate after you hit the minimum, or what's the thought?
I think the thought is that you have take or pays on both of your contracts, so you're limited either way. So if you could at least reduce your requirement on one side, that gives you some more flexibility. Right now, when I looked back at the past few years at least, you guys were paying for at least a little bit of water each year that you weren't using on one side or the other. So that's something that we'd probably dig into a little bit deeper separately from this. I didn't get super detailed into strategy of how to alter the contract and stuff like that as part of the rate study, but it's definitely a unique situation that Bel Aire is in to have both of those contracts and both of them with take or pay limits that are close to where you guys are at using.
So are we exceeding those minimum requirements in both cases, or is that a hit and miss?
So, and I might be able to talk on this as well. So what happened? So last summer was a really wet summer. We take up to the limit of Wichita's water because it's the most expensive. And once we do all Wichita's, we turn off their valve and turn open CCUA's. So the CCUA, I'm not as concerned about the 1.5 take or pay. Oh, I guess, yeah, the 1.5 take or pay, if we lowered that, it would work out okay. But there's other aspects in that. In the contract, Park City doesn't have a take or pay, and we split the operations costs 60-40, I think. So if they don't use as much water and we don't use as much water, it kind of gets, the math gets a little different. So I want to kind of reopen that contract up and take a good hard look at it, because me personally, it would be nice to have a lower take or pay. That would be the easiest method to do it. But if we want to somehow look at the split between us as well, that might be something worth watching.
And from what I remember, Park City didn't have a take or pay requirement at all. So Bel Aire does, but they don't for some reason.
Do you know the history of that as to why that is?
I'm not aware.
Yeah, I can say that getting rid of the take or pay or messing with it too much could be difficult. I know we looked at that when I first got here. It's tied to our bond as we invested in the CCUA partnership. Some of that bond money is tied to a take or pay, so it's pretty deep in the agreement. It would be hard to completely eliminate. Like Ted said, it might be a good idea to look at adjust the percentages, but it seemed very difficult to completely do away with.
Okay. So you think it's buried in the bond contract that we've issued for the water, sewer and water?
Yeah, for the initial one.
Thank you.
Ted, just tell me if I'm kind of understanding some of the pros and cons here correctly. The good thing we got going is, we have a lot of reserves, so, we're not in trouble or, everything's fine. So that's very super good news, and we're not talking about skies falling. Big negative we have going on is we're just sort of leveraged to the hilt. We just have not a lot of flexibility because of our debt, doing it because of our contracts we have to honor. And we have to have a big reserve because we don't have a lot of flex room. Because if we would lose money, we would lose revenue. Our expenses, we don't have a lot of flex room on changing our expenses. Maybe we could defer a little bit of maintenance or whatever, but that comes back to bite you eventually. So we're kind of trying to be careful here, because if we let our reserves go down too much, maybe 1 year's okay, but if we let our reserves go down too much, eventually we get to the point that if anything drastic would happen, we can't cut down our expenses because our expenses are so much tied into things that have no flexibility to change the rate of. Is that kind of the dance we're in right now?
A+. Yes.
So the recommendation you're making is make no issue. Look at everything at the end of the year, December. Maybe consider things for the next year, but possibly not. Depends on what you see. Is that what you're recommending?
Yes, that would be the staff's recommendation, because it's really I don't think we need to raise rates when we end with that type of reserve in 2019. It'd be a hard sell, and I understand, to be frank with you, and I think with PEC coming on and Nicole's training, we're not going to get any type of rate shock because I'm going to be on top of it. And I think in December we'll try it out, and if you guys like it, we can continue on with that model. If not, we can. That's why I wanted to create an alternative other than let's just take the recommendation and raise the rates. I would rather, because we have the fund reserves, let's try it to basically do a in-house rate study every year, and then we have data to back it up.
And it's a 5-year review into the future.
Yeah, and I think we'll know a lot more than we knew when this rate study was going on about the CCUA sewer plant and where that cost is going, and how it is, because I think you pointed to it as well as, hey, we had to put in what the estimate was right now, and it's like Woodlawn, we had estimates, and then 3 months later it's different, and now it's different today. So until that bond is set, we won't know the full-fledged amount.
Okay.
Well, my thoughts on it when I was looking over the material is kind of like, if there was a way we could not raise rates this year, we should try to do it. I mean, it's just, raising, any kind of tax healing stuff during this particular time in the world seems like that's going to go over like a ton of bricks. And if we have the reserves to be able to do it, I'm not saying we should never raise rates. Sometimes you have to. I understand that, but I am certainly understanding not wanting to do it, at least until we can reevaluate in December.
And Nicole, it's probably the first time your recommendation didn't get fully adopted, right?
Yeah, I can't think of another time, but it's understandable.
She was great. PDC was great to work with. Like I said at the beginning, I think Ann got a lot out of it as well, and I know I got a lot out of it during the study, and Nicole's going to train me on their tools here in the next few months. So we're excited to not only have a study done, but to get the knowledge in house to be able to avoid any future cost as long as me and my staff are around.
I'm glad to see that you've got some looking at capital improvements or repairs in there, so that you have a plan for what you're going to do. You may not follow that plan letter to letter, but at least we have an idea of what the plan is. which helps you budget better, because you know approximately what those costs would be for each year. I think that's a great thing to do, and I'd like a lot more of that. That's good. Very good. Any other questions, comments for Nicole or Ted on this issue?
I've got several.
Okay,
Some things that I understand. First, I'd like to applaud whoever managed 2019 because we came in way better than we projected. But what I don't get out of all those tables we looked at, something horrible seems to happen in 23, 24, where we just drop off our projected revenues. I don't know if somebody could pull that table up again, but in the year 24, everything goes to heck, it looks like. Can you explain why? And I'd also like to know, do we have people on ERUs now, or have we implemented that?
No, right now the policy is $2 for every residential and $10 for every commercial, just a flat rate.
Okay, I kept asking about the ERUs because we're only talking about maybe 50 customers. I don't know if it's worth the billing hassle to mess with it.
Nicole, you want me to share your presenter if you want to pull that table up?
Sure.
Okay. And John, to speak on your ERU question, I don't think we were in it for the revenue of it. It's more of this is what every mid-sized city does or big city does. If we don't start at some point and we become a mid-sized to big-sized city, then we're going to be back. It's going to be a lot bigger issue. So I think the idea was if we start with a small group and then as we move on, as we improve our permit software and different types of software, we can start tracking that for residential use as well. And then eventually, because we'll have all the data on all the homes in Bel Aire, we could go to that system if we become that larger to mid-sized city. I think it's more of a forthright type discussion or of what's ahead of us instead of what's going to do for us today. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm not against it.
Sure.
It's the initial cost of going to it that seems questionable when you only have 40 or 50 people it's going to affect.
Yeah.
And even if all 50 of them paid the highest rate, it'd only bring in another few thousand a year, $2,000 or $3,000. So I'm not sure it's worth the effort at this point, at least. Yeah, if you look at 2023, we have a year-end balance of 8,000, and then we go negative again in 2024. We've been growing less and less expenses there for several years, and then 2024 we just fall off again. What happens in 2024? Because that.
Expenditure. So there. I think that we might have an increase in capital outlay might be the reason there. And that was based on the phasing of the CIP items. So you have a little bit difference of expenditures from year to year.
So that's based on
Is that something
possible projects. That's possible projects, not something that we're required to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So yeah, that's something that you could adjust going forward is how much of capital outlay you spend each year on different projects to, you want to keep up on maintenance. Otherwise it's going to hit all at once and it's going to be expensive, but,
Right.
I try to spread it out as much as I could, but we talked to staff about when that, what phasing might be appropriate for those.
Okay, it just looked really bad that all of a sudden in 24 we went negative and we've been doing good for 4 years.
So maybe just a suggestion, maybe you know, maybe you don't, but is that maybe when we're phasing in, starting the bond payments for the sewer upgrade? Is that possibly causing that $100,000 difference in that expenses?
Because it shouldn't
That's
be
with the water. So on the sewer, you see there's a big jump in expenses on the contractual side. There's a big jump in expenses. in this range, and that's with the sewer plant.
Yeah, and this is where it gets interesting, because if they go straight to bond, it'll hit us in 2021, 2022. If they go tip note to bond, it'll be later. So that's where we need to talk with. In the history of CCUA, they just go straight to bond, which is something that the City of Bel Aire doesn't really do. So we had Nicole put it in the 2021 just to be a conservative on these forecasts.
Okay, and right now your opinion is we should not change the water rates at all. Should we maybe think about 1 or 2% instead of a 4.5 or 5?
So,
Well, the automatic increases right now are 3%.
Yeah.
So it would just continue with that.
Okay, so you're saying stick to the automatic 3%.
Yeah.
I thought I heard we weren't going to increase at all. Was well,
I think it's already increased, hasn't it?
well, maybe for 20, but we're kind of looking at 21 at this point,
So-
right? This is the beginning of the.
so the staff's recommendation is to not change the current 3% model we're on right now, meaning automatic 3% every year. That's served us well in the past, and as you can tell with Nicole's stuff, we might not get to do all the CIP or all the things in the utility CIP, but we really do need to maintain. I think we learned from the streets, the predicament we're in right now in streets, that that's something that needs to be some of our priorities. So that's really where a lot of that 3% increase goes year to year.
So
Yeah.
talking about streets, then should we be increasing the stormwater fee maybe from $2 to $3 or something? Jack it up a little bit.
And that's something for you guys to decide and discuss, and we can have that discussion if you were. I wouldn't mind. I think we did. Nicole, did we do a stormwater CIP as well in the study? I
Yeah.
can't remember off the top of my head.
So when I projected out the stormwater fund balance with the current rates with the CIP items, the fund balance in 2024 was 27,000 versus the target of 30,000. So even with the CIP items included, you guys are still looking pretty good at your current rates.
Thank you.
Okay, that's good to hear.
Because it seems like our big concerns start happening in year 4 and year 5, I think. So waiting one more year, and then if it's like, oh no, it's now year 3 and year 4, we start getting more serious about thinking about raising it. But if our big concerns are 4 or 5 years away, I think holding 1 year and making sure that those projections come true is a good way to look at it.
That makes a lot of sense to me as well, especially since when we do a lot of these forecasts, they tend to err on the conservative side, planning for maybe the worst case scenario, well, not the catastrophic case scenario, I realize that, but often maybe worse than expected case in a number of ways. I'd hate to jump the gun on, raising rates, and so I fully connect with staff's recommendation here.
Well, good.
All right, any other comments or concerns?
I don't think so. And I'd like to thank Nicole. Did a great job. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Nicole. We really appreciate the help and the work you guys put into this. And Ted, you as well. I know you had to do a lot of study on this, and so the Utility Advisory Committee, so we really appreciate their help on this as well. So,
Hey,
with that, we'll go on to the next items.
Mayor Benaj, hey, Jeff, would you mind maybe logging out and joining back again and see if that fixes this? I know you guys see them as upright, but the YouTube has them upside down, so I don't want to continue on and you just be upside down, Jeff. I'm sorry, but we'll wait.
Okay.
Maybe we'll take a 4 or 5 minute. If you need to go do something for 4 or 5 minutes, we'll have Jeff log off and log back on, see if that fixes it. It might be a glitch.
Well, and just another thing related to this issue is I'm glad we have the ability to keep tracking these numbers so we don't have to wait 2 years and know whether, there's a problem or not. So I think that gives me also a bit of a comfort that we're going to be able to really keep track of these numbers and be able to continue to get reports on them. Because if we raise rates and, things didn't go, project as planned, I don't really want to explain why we raised rates and we really didn't need to, because, obviously I'm sure many of you get lots of complaints about our water and sewer and stuff rates being too high. And so raising too quickly would probably be, would be met with a lot of ire.
Yeah.
The hardest part of these studies is the revenue side. From experience, the expense side's pretty known, but how much, if we grow by however many people, how much is that going to increase revenue versus that? And that's where I was really unsure. And Nicole has showed me a few things already, and will continue to show me things on, how many meters we set up in a year makes a big difference in projections going forward versus, just this flat percent that you think your revenues are going to increase. Also, weather plays a big deal in water rates, because if you look, we don't have a big businesses that use tons of water. That helps a lot of cities. Our biggest customers are lawn irrigations for HOAs and different things like that. So that's also a greater risk on our revenues than you think, because we're weather dependent on a lot of revenue on that end. So that's my spiel. I'm done. I'm going to turn over to Jackie. She's going to sit in my spot, and so you can hear her better. Dang. All right.
Well, that's why she turned off. Okay.
Yep,
I'm going to leave you guys.
Okay.
All right.
That's cool.
Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you for bearing with me.
Thank you.
Bye.
He's in. He's still upside down.
So, Jackie, maybe you know this, maybe Ted knows this. I probably should have asked him if they walked away, but we said in our policy that we would allow citizen comment. Did we get any comments from any citizens? Do we know?
Not for this meeting. We didn't get any.
All right. Thank you. I know we got an email from a citizen, but that was just the one email. I think everybody got a copy of that.
Okay. Right.
Am I still upside down or what?
Yeah, one more thing. Councilmember Elsoff, Ted said to try to flip your screen upside down.
It might look bad on your end, but it'll look better on our end, meaning the broadcast.
I don't know how
In other
many.
words, should be recording correctly.
So I'm still upside down?
Yeah.
Maybe you got your plug-in upside down.
There you go,
I was
Jack.
going to say, maybe it sounds in.
I don't know if you can see it, but that's what YouTube looks like.
Oh, it is. Yeah.
This is a city provided.
It's weird. Because it doesn't look right.
It's in your computer of the photo I took, and it's right.
Looks good here, too.
Yeah. Well, as far as the comments, we haven't gotten any. Right now, we're still expecting comments to come in via email. Council may decide to, later on, he's right set up on his camera. Council may decide to have a more interactive, depending on how long these virtual meetings go. Council may want to, oh, there you go. You're good on our side.
Hold in my lap.
That works.
I can't flip the iPad in the holder. It doesn't.
Oh, so you had to flip the holder over as well. Yeah, that works.
You look right. Yep, so whatever you did worked.
So long-term, council may decide to implement a more interactive format for workshops where we'd have the clerk monitoring YouTube, and then it would still be up to the mayor to grant 5 minutes to read comments from YouTube on any given subject, but that would be somewhat of a more interactive way of doing it.
In favor of that. I don't know what the rest of the council would think about that. The more we can have citizens input, the more opportunity we give them, the better, I think.
Yeah, it really would come down to, how long-term. So next workshop, if we had one in May, you may want to do an interactive format then.
Yeah, definitely.
So with that, unless there's other discussion, Mayor?
Not that I'm aware of. We'll go on to the next agenda item, I think. I think we're good there.
Okay. Okay, so we are looking at the vacancy policy. So now that we've had a chance to use it with this council, it sounded like there were some updates that we needed to make. And based on our last conversation, council has two versions of the updates. And the ultimate, I guess the most key factor, the most notable factor is one version, which is in orange, allows the mayor to break a tie where there's a tie for a vacancy vote. And that would bring the mayor into the voting process. The alternative, which is in blue, the mayor would not break a tie. And that's closer to what's currently going on. The mayor would not participate in the voting process. So I'll just go through just kind of briefly the changes for the public. I know council's had a chance to look at it. The first page of changes are just changes that I'd recommend either way, whatever you do. This COVID has brought to our attention that we need to be kind of thinking about what to do if some catastrophic event happened and we couldn't reach a quorum. We'd need to be able to reestablish a quorum. So the first edited paragraph, I'll just start with the orange version, would allow the clerk after 120 days, or if we failed to have a quorum, if we had less than 3 members of the council, the clerk would automatically put together a request or to put together provisions to hold a special election. So for some reason, we couldn't get enough people together to create a governing body, the clerk would automatically put together the provisions to have a special election and fill vacancies. Or if council failed to confirm a vacant seat, the clerk would do the same thing. So those are provisions that I recommend either way, just because, we need something to happen if we don't have a quorum. So that's that first paragraph. That's on both versions. The change under paragraph 3, item A, also right now, when a vacancy occurs, the mayor has to announce the vacancy at a meeting. Well, if for some reason we can't have a meeting because we don't have quorum, or if for some reason we're not having a meeting for 3 weeks, we can get that clock started sooner by having the mayor announce the vacancy in some other acceptable format. It seems reasonable nowadays to be able to announce via the city newspaper or posting on the city's website. That seems like a common practice. You don't have to do it that way. If you prefer to keep the announcement in a formal meeting, you can do that. I'm just recommending another way or more options for you to be able to get that announcement out if for some reason you can't in a meeting. And item A also addresses right now we have a 45-day window once that vacancy is announced where people can submit their resumes and apply for the position. 45 days seems like a long time when you're trying to govern and get a new person on. 30 days might be more reasonable. I think we talked about that in our last meeting. So 30 days is something I'm proposing. I think it matches what you've talked about before, but you can certainly leave it at 45 days. Finally, the other kind of just important change to do, no matter what you decide to do, is to allow citizens to contact the mayor. Right now, they contact the mayor if they're interested. That's just a very general statement that the policy has in it. You can have citizens contact City Hall. That way they can contact in a more formal way. The clerk could record those contacts, and they can still contact the mayor as well, but it just lists out, that it would be appropriate to contact City Hall to show interest.
Now that one's only in the one. Is that supposed to be in both, or is that just supposed to be in the one?
Let me see. that one, City Hall is supposed to be in both. I see what you're saying, how it's not, it doesn't say City Hall in the blue version, so it is supposed to be in both.
And just to clarify on that, when it says to contact City Hall, it says contact City Hall, but then it says send information to the mayor.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess I'm a little bit confused about that. If somebody is contacting City Hall, but then they're sending stuff to the mayor,
Mm-hmm.
those feel like different entities to me. If I'm maybe going to contact City Hall, I might expect to contact somebody on staff, like the city clerk, or somebody in the administration, as opposed to contacting the mayor at City Hall, or in addition to that. What were your thoughts there, Jackie, on that?
That you just caught a point where I just kind of was wrestling back and forth. I didn't want to put contact. We could transfer the whole process to the clerk, right? But then it doesn't. This is supposed to be the mayor's process. We could have the clerk administer it, then give the folder to the mayor, and the mayor go through the names. But it seemed like there was a sense of ownership to, contact the governing body if you want to become a member of the governing body. So I wanted to leave the mayor as the point of contact, but if for some reason a mayor was incapacitated, the vacancy was for, or the person just wanted to contact City Hall, I wanted to have that there as well. I think the correction that I'll need to make is to contact City Hall with supporting documents to the attention of the mayor, or something to that effect.
Excuse me, if you're going to contact City Hall, you should spell out a specific duty like the city manager or the city clerk, not just City Hall.
I agree. I think clerk is the appropriate person. Maybe it's the mayor and or the city clerk is a better way to state that. Just a suggestion.
I thought the attention to the mayor, City Hall attention to the mayor, I mean, assume there's mail that comes for the mayor to City Hall at times. So I think that was a good way to do it.
Yeah.
I just felt the way this word was, but yeah, I hear what you're saying, John.
Yeah, and I guess maybe something that you mentioned, Jackie, raised a question in my mind. Would we be actively, if there were to, for some reason, be a vacancy in the mayor's position, should we be considering that as a potential factor that could occur at some point when there's also a vacancy on the council?
Absolutely. If the mayor's position were vacant, of course, your council president, Councilmember Elsoff, would fill in, but that vacancy process would still be there. So that's maybe why it would be appropriate to have the clerk or the mayor, but I really like it being the mayor's process for, a lay citizen to be able to know that, I'm going to let the mayor know of my interest. So either way works. But
And if we had attention to the mayor and the mayor incapacitated, then obviously Councilman Elshoff would be
opening
getting that mail, right?
Correct.
Yes.
So I can broaden that language to work it out. If everybody's okay with the clerk being included in that process, I can leave her, but, make it sound like the priority is to send it to the mayor. Okay. The next section of the orange the next section is in blue for some reason in section C, the selection process. This is just for me and the clerk, just part of our open records kind of, if someone asks for a record, we have to be able to show them why we would or would not give it to them. So it just helps us. So that's, we'll make certain information available. Sometimes when people submit their resume, they submit some personal information that we don't get to give out through Kansas Open Records Act. When we can point to this, it makes that process easier. So that's kind of an administrative thing. Again, going through the document and confirmation of replacement. again, you're going to have to decide whether you want that period of time to be 45 days or 30 days. And from there, then we'll get into the main kind of actions. Do you have any thoughts on whether the process, based on your experience with the last vacancy, that was a 45-day window for applicants? Did you like that, or would you like to update the policy to make it 30 days?
Everybody waited to the last minute. Really, you make it 30 days, they're going to wait to the last minute. They'll get it in the last week before 30 days is up. Usually you get 45 days, they're going to wait till the last week till 45 days is up. That's the way it came out last time.
Yeah.
I like 30 days.
I like 30 days also. Get them on the stick if they want to do it.
Me too.
Okay, yep. Well, I think that's a good update. Make it 30 days so you can get back to business. So once we have that issued, if those changes are okay with you, like I said, they're pretty much administrative changes. Now we get to the real issue. In the case, in the confirmation process, the first part talks about how the mayor is going to recommend a replacement. That won't change either way. The mayor would make a replacement. You're going to have to decide if you want the mayor to truly recommend by nominating a replacement, or the mayor to read a name. That's going to come out further in the process in this conversation, and then I'll update the language to make sure that's consistent. But the mayor would initially make that, either recommend the replacement or state a name, and then from there, the council is going to vote on the policy, vote on that person at an open meeting. And in the case of a tie, in this version, the mayor would vote to break the tie. If there weren't enough votes, even with the mayor breaking the tie, then you'd have to decide your next steps. So next steps could be that the mayor would choose to leave it open, leave the vacancy open until the next general election. So if that first candidate didn't get selected, he could say, well, we're going to proceed, we're going to let this go to an election. Or the mayor may decide to bring another name to the council. Again, this is more of a recommendation style. You have to decide, do you want him to recommend, or do you want him to proceed through the list? If the mayor decided that, he would state another name, possibly at the next meeting or at that same meeting. And then if there was a tie, the mayor would vote to break the tie and proceed through that as far as he would want to. He wouldn't have to read through all the names. The third option would be that the mayor would present all the candidates from the entire pool of applicants. So you have a couple of decisions here, just based on your last experience.
The way I read this is whether the mayor breaks the tie is kind of one question, and the other question is which of these three options that we should go with.
Correct.
And so I think we should probably tackle those one at a time. My thoughts on the mayor breaking the tie is, I think if the normal situation is going to happen is that there's going to be one vacant seat left, or one vacant seat open. That's probably going to be normally what happens. So it's going to be 4-4, right? And so I think the mayor breaking the tie wouldn't fix every trouble, but it might make it way easier. You know what I mean? I think that might smooth it out, and we won't have to go to the next option year as often. We still might, and we can discuss that, but I think that is the way that we don't get to gridlock, because it's not like I don't feel like we've been the only council that's gotten in this gridlock. My understanding is the time before it happened, they got into gridlock and they would have had to go to this other option. So I kind of like the mayor breaking the tie just to be able to kind of move it on. If he's supposed to be the one recommending, you know, he's got agency there. I can be talked out of that, but that's kind of what I'm thinking right now.
If I can just say
I
here,
think the mayor should do a recommendation. That way, if there's a candidate that presents itself that we really don't want, like a Klan member or some really offbeat group that we don't think we want on the council, that the mayor has the right to veto a nomination, and then I lost my train of thought there, but yeah, he should be able to break the tie also. The mere fact that he nominated it, I think that the tie should go to the mayor. It's kind of how I view that.
Yeah, I think with the likely scenario being that there's an even number of council members that are voting on the issue, it's likely that there will over and over again be cases where there are tie votes, and I think having the mayor break the tie makes quite a bit of sense to me.
Any other thoughts on the tie? So as Dr. Schroeder said, yeah, you should think about the tie, but you can't help but think about the tie in tandem with what the next step will be, which is, gosh, if, the mayor breaks this tie, it won't have to go to a general election and cost the city a lot of money. Or if the mayor breaks this tie, if I vote this way, the mayor will have to break the tie, and the next candidate's going to have to be read through, or so that those are they're separate, but they're together. I do think that some of these 1, 2, or 3 gives the mayor more control or not, or gives more predictability or not. So, what do you think about that?
I think if the mayor is clearly picking someone that's obviously not a good choice and trying to do something that the council can be like, we clearly see that there's something shaky going on. The council still has the power to be like, no, there's 4 of us and 1 of you, and 3 of us can still say no, right? So I don't think we're giving the mayor ultimate authority here. The council still does need to maintain the authority of like, boy, we know the candidates, and this, I can't make hide nor hair of this. And if 3 of the council members are all seeing it that way, they still maintain the power to be like, none of us understand what you're doing here. If one looks at it this way, it can still go through whatever. But I still think the council does have some power to be like, the mayor can't do something that no one can, everyone's looking at and being like, this doesn't make a lick of sense.
Right.
Yeah, and I guess one thought that I'd like to share, kind of accompanied with the question, is I think it's my understanding that in when a vacancy occurs, it's typically going to be for a period of less than 2 years, and I want to make sure my understanding of that's correct. And so I think what I understand is if someone were elected to a 4-year term, and then they served 6 months of that term and had 3.5 years left on the term, and the mayor appointed somebody to fill that vacancy that was confirmed by the council, they would only serve until the next regular council election. They wouldn't serve the full remaining 3.5 years. They would only serve a 1.5 years.
Correct.
Yep.
Okay.
Happened. That's what Jeff Hawes did. He was filling an unexpired term, and then that term was up. So,
yeah, I wanted to make sure that was correct because, as I thought through this, I don't really think it would really ever make sense to hold a special election for a term of 18 months or a year or 6 months. The remaining term on a council seat is going to be of a duration that is so small that I think the number of people that are interested in running for that is going to be really low. The amount of effort required to run for election is really high. I just don't see that as a good solution. And so I might wonder if, I guess I would recommend that we kind of just rule that out as a default option to the extent that we can, and maybe even consider, defaulting back to the previous election as a backstop, and, the folks that ran in the previous election and were runners-up as a backstop for, filling the council seat if the council was unable to reach a recommendation. And so I just wanted to throw those thoughts out there and see what everyone else kind of had to say along those lines.
let me clarify what I slightly misspoke previously. What happened on that election? It was Ken Lee's seat. Ken Lee resigned after a few months in the seat. Then Diane Wynn was appointed to that seat, and she had to stand for election at the next election. She and Jeff Hawes won that election, and then he filled out the rest of Ken Lee's seat. So 3 people actually filled that seat for that 4-year term. So now that's been filled by somebody who's served a 4-year term.
Yeah, so Justin, you're basically suggesting another option here where it's something like saying, listen, this is going to be a short term, a special election is a big deal. If, whatever system we come up with, we're not, we have this backdrop of whoever, finished the closest in the previous election, we just go with them. And the thing I was thinking about that, I hadn't really considered that really pushes the council to say, we know who it's going to be if we don't want to do it. So unless we really, if we're okay with that person, we just let it go to that. And so unless we really don't want that person, then we're going to have to get our act together and, nominate someone else or whatever. I think that would kind of really push us in a direction to know what decision we're making. So for example, if that person, let's say they got 1 vote, so the council is going to go, are we really going to just let the person who got 1 vote be on this thing? Well, then we as council would need to get our act together to be able to nominate someone who would have more support of the community, the person that got 1 vote. But it would put a little bit of that pressure on. I'm guessing staff really doesn't like having to go to a special election as too easy of a thing to do. If that's kind of too easy of the default, they probably don't want that because that takes, effort and resources and whatnot. Yeah, I hadn't considered Councilman Smith's idea here until he just mentioned it. And, it's interesting, something to think about for sure.
Now, we may get into a scenario with that where the person that was next up doesn't want the seat.
That's
and
right.
so they may decline, and we would need a provision for that to either it would go to the next person, or maybe that is the extreme case where a special election would be the final backstop. And so you could see a policy maybe that said the mayor will make a recommendation to the council, and then the mayor will either choose to make another recommendation to the council, or it will go to the person that got the next highest votes in the last election. And finally, if the council seat remains vacant, a special election will be held to fill that seat. It's kind of a 3-step process. I know that starts to get a little complicated, potentially to craft, but it's a thought that I'm having.
And one thing to keep in mind with the special election is the city pays for it. It's not like the county donates money for that to happen. The city pays for that. And that could be multiple thousands of dollars.
If we had to have a special election, could we have paper ballots at City Hall and have that instead of all the setup, the fancy setup the Sedgwick County election does?
Well, yeah, that'd be a good question for the election commissioner.
Yeah. The election commissioner says that if they're already having an election, so it might be a special election for us, but if we can just have it go, and I think sometimes they have a ballot in August, November. I don't know if they have any in the spring anymore, but if they already have a ballot that's out, it won't cost us to add. If they already have machines coming to Bel Aire for whatever the issue is, it won't cost us to have our election on that race. However, if we do have to set up a special election, that would cost.
I think I remember hearing in the last couple of years some school boards having special elections that were mail-in ballots only. But that's the only way they operate. I don't know how they did that. I don't know what the rules are on that. It might be, like John said, suggesting. I just don't know the rules. I don't know anything about it.
I can look at the various options for maybe replacing the special election with either a mail-in ballot or a poll that the city takes on its own. I can look into that. Because obviously the most cost prohibitive is going to be the special election.
So are we kind of moving together on saying we would like to avoid the special election if we could? Are we kind of, not that we've made any decision, but are we all kind of thinking we don't really want a special election unless we just, if we have to, we have to. I'm not saying, it probably has to be the final solution if nothing can be done. But are we kind of moving towards saying a special election would be a lot of work on, or potential cost, or, we have to do it a special way. Let's look up all the options, I assume staff doesn't want to deal with any of that. And if we have to, we have to. But are we kind of moving together saying, let's craft this in a way where that doesn't need to happen unless it really, really needs to happen?
I think that's the last ditch. Or if we have too many vacancies.
Yeah.
If we have 3 vacancies, we have to have an election. So.
Right. That would be automatic, like we talked about at the top. But for less vacancies where the mayor is kind of setting up, alternatives to, his first candidate not working, maybe there could be an answer where we do a mail-in ballot or some other poll type ballot to fill that vacancy.
Yeah, that's going to depend on the time of the year, because if the vacancy comes up in May, we go on the ballot, the regular ballot. But if it comes up in January, we don't want to wait till May to get them on the regular ballot.
Right.
Yeah, and I think considering some of the options around us doing it ourselves or, looking into alternatives there, ultimately there's still going to be a pretty high cost to that from, the staff time, the opportunity cost of the other things that our staff could be working on is also, of cost to the city, and that's not insignificant. And so I think no matter how the special election is conducted, it's going to be expensive. It's going to be a process that it sounds like maybe isn't our preferred method of filling this vacancy, and maybe should be only reserved for, the situations of last resort.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's what I think.
What are other people's thoughts on Justin's idea of going with the person who got the next votes as an option? Justin, clarify that for me again. Is that we just automatically go to that? It's if the mayor doesn't have anyone to recommend, he doesn't want to recommend we go to that, or the council gets in gridlock, or explain that one more time for me.
Yeah, so the way that I was proposing it the first time, and please bear with me because this idea is something that I'm thinking through as I'm sharing it with you guys, but it would be kind of a 3-tiered process where the first tier of the process would be where the mayor would review the applicants, and the mayor would put forth a recommendation to the council. The council would either vote to confirm or reject the mayor's appointment of the council member. If the council rejects the mayor's appointment, the mayor should either choose to put forth another nomination, or the position would default to the person that had the highest votes in the previous election, should the mayor choose to stop his nomination process.
So is it an automatic process? It would be an automatic. If the mayor chose
It better not be. You better check with the guy if he wants it still.
Yeah, I think at that point it might be the city clerk or somebody on staff would then confirm with the next highest vote getter if they were willing to serve, and if so, it would be automatic, and they would fill the vacancy. And if they were not willing at that point, it would have to go to a special election.
Yeah. What about what happened here was the mayor went through some names and then found out it possibly wouldn't be able to proceed. So he wanted to go back and consider some names. Would you want to possibly include where if the clerk found out that person wasn't willing to serve, that the mayor could consider going through the remaining names, or could consider making a new nomination, and then if not, it would go to special election?
That sounds great to me.
I'm probably just muddling the waters here. I thought of a scenario that probably won't happen. Let's say the mayor gets elected. There's two applications. One's his or her spouse, and they're not going to nominate them because that's obviously not going to work. And the other one's the person that cheated him out $100,000 in a deal a year ago. So he's not going to nominate them. He doesn't want to nominate either one. The current way it's set up, it looks like he or she has to nominate someone at least the first time. What if the mayor goes, I have two applicants, I'm not going to do my spouse because that's, conflict of interest. I'm not going to do the person that cheated me out $100,000. I would just like to not nominate anyone. And then it will go back, then it would fall back to, the previous election if we're going to go the route we've been talking about. I mean, do we need to think about that scenario? I know we had a lot of applicants last time, but I think the time before that, maybe there were only two, if I remember. Mm-hmm. Maybe I'm getting that wrong.
Yeah, we should. We should give the council the ability to appoint if the mayor refuses. I think that's a great point.
So what you were saying, Dr. Schroeder, was that if the mayor thought that there was no one worth nominating from the pool of applicants for whatever reason, that the policy would be clear that he would not have to make a nomination. Now, where it goes next, I thought Councilmember Elsoff is saying that it should be left to the council to go to the next phase of recommending an appointment in lieu of the mayor's.
Yeah, we're still discussing where it would go next,
right.
But I'm just imagining the scenario where the mayor says, I just can't recommend either of these options and stand by it. We need to have a provision for that.
So currently what we would have, and I could clarify in this language, is that the mayor would be able to open the vacancy. So long as 120 days hadn't passed, the mayor could open the vacancy back up for another 30 days. I don't know if that would get candidates or not.
Applicants.
Correct.
And then if he doesn't recommend anyone 120 days, it's this whatever the 120 day special election or whatever it's the policy says.
I thought we had three tiers. One was the mayor nominates somebody. If those fail or he fails to nominate, then we go to a previous candidate. If they refuse, then we go to a special election.
We had that if the mayor's recommendation, if the mayor made a recommendation, that recommendation didn't pass. We can add that if the mayor fails to nominate, this will happen as well. Or, like Councilmember Elsoff, I think he's trying to bring out another idea where the council might be able to make a nomination. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's what I was suggesting. Because why go to a special election when you don't have to?
Yeah, I wonder about the logistics of nominating somebody and how that would work. Would people and putting people forth to nominate? I really think I like the idea of having a single person in charge of, nominating and sorting through the applicants and going through that determination. I could see a scenario where some chaos would occur if I were nominating somebody and Dr. Schroeder were nominating somebody and Councilmember Welch were nominating somebody, and we all had a different person that we wanted to nominate. I can see how that could be problematic and less than ideal, but I also connect with the concerns around it going straight to the special election, because I would also prefer to avoid that at most cost. And so potentially maybe it could either fall back to the previous election before it would go to a special election in that scenario, or our council president could have the opportunity to make a nomination so that we're back to a single person responsible for making a nomination.
As long as you have a mayor, I don't think you can let it go to the president.
Yeah, I think that's how
Why not?
Because now you're usurping the mayor's power.
Well, the mayor is relinquishing his duty at that point, or obligation, right?
No, he
That's
just
the
sees his duty. He sees his duty differently. He doesn't think he should nominate any of those people. That's his duty. So he wants.
Yeah,
to
but
go
the
on to
citizens
another
have
step.
the citizens expect representation. That the citizens ought not have a situation that just allows an open seat to linger, and that because the mayor refuses to nominate, that seat stays open. The people
That's
aren't
why
being represented when that
the
happens.
special election.
And that's why
Yeah.
the ultimate we can't get it together is always going to have to be a special election. That's always going to have to be. And I think we can always think of a scenario where we can't get it done and it's going to go to a special. I mean, we're going to try to craft this to make that not happen just as absolutely best we can. But it seems like I think I could always come up with a way that it's going to have to go to a special election.
Well, yeah, we're talking about tiers of steps here that step down.
Right.
The election is the last resort, and so I'm talking about another step for the special election. That's all.
So if
you brought up a good point.
Yeah, the mayor doesn't want to nominate anyone. We could just, to me, that is the same as him nominating, getting it rejected, and then going to the vote person. So we can say, I'm refusing to nominate. Then we go to the next vote getter. And then, to me, those sound pretty similar. If he nominates 10 people and they all get rejected by the council, okay, well, I'm not going to nominate anyone more. We're going to go to what the last election.
When would that ever happen?
Yeah, dreaming up here. So I think him not nominating anyone, or him having one or two people being rejected, sounds pretty similar to me. And either one of those things that happen should follow kind of the same process in my mind. And if that's going to be, let's take the next person who got votes, got the highest votes. I would see that just being the same process. I just think we need to have it clearly put in the policy, just in case maybe so few people want to do. I mean, I think it's possible one person is the only person that wants to do it, and it's just not hard to imagine one person putting in their application and not wanting to do it. Probably won't happen, but I mean, it could. So, I mean, I think the mayor would probably try to find someone that he thought was valuable and try to talk him into doing it, I suppose. I'm not saying it's a likely scenario, but
there were plenty of cities in Kansas in the last year. I think the league put out an article that some cities were having a hard time finding people to be mayor or get on council. So yeah, it's obviously Bel Aire doesn't have that problem, but we should plan for maybe not having any nominees. And then
and I guess the other thing I might add is I wouldn't want, in a scenario where either the mayor's put forth one nomination and it gets declined, or in the scenario where the mayor doesn't make a nomination, I wouldn't want to wait a full 120 days or even have the opportunity to wait 120 days before we advance to the next step of the process. It seems to me that after the 30-day period is concluded, there should be another time period that says, that the process will continue within the next meeting or the next two meetings to advance to this next step in the process of filling the seat. There shouldn't be the opportunity to wait up to 90 days in addition to the 30 days with nothing happening, in my opinion.
So should the mayor fail to nominate within 75 days? That way you have at least, he has a window to accept nominees or a window to accept applications and then another window to accept more applications. I think it is wise to give him at least 2 chances to collect applications.
I think 21 days would be good. From the date that the applications close out, 21 days, and mayor should be able to make a nomination within that period of time. You need a little bit of time to review applicants because if everybody waits till the last minute, then you haven't had a chance to really review them and vet through them. So you need some time, but you also need to look at the cycle of the council meetings as well. So, 21 days or 28 days, whatever makes sense there. Looking at that cycle so that there is a sense of urgency that you don't just let it languish. I agree with that. It's perfectly valid.
Yeah, and so I think I'm proposing that the process continues, not that the process ends. And so after the initial application period is concluded, within a certain amount of time, it either needs to continue through a nomination process or be reopened to more nominations based on a lack of nominations. But there needs to be progress, and we need to be advancing and getting that council vacancy seat filled at all times during this process, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, and I don't want to go to a short period like 21 days because I want to see something published in the brief everybody will read, just in case they didn't hear any other way, so that they have a chance to nominate themselves.
So 30 days instead of 21 for that second window?
Or a month, whatever.
Keep it 30 days and double that, the 60 days for the grace period, or I don't, what's the technical term for that?
Yeah.
The 120 days gets cut in half, basically.
Basically, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, 120 days is way too long.
Okay. So 60 days. I'll do 60, but I probably need to think through. I think that 120 days is tied to some of our charter ordinances, so the entire process can take up to 120 days, but we can put triggers in that would force it to move sooner. So that we can at least do that. I might not be able to get rid of the 120 days right away.
So I thought I was hearing being said here is you have a 30-day from the day you make the announcement of the vacancy, 30 days for applicants. Then from there, there's 30 days for the mayor to make a nomination.
Or reopen.
Make a nomination. And from there, you go through whatever the next three steps are.
So if the mayor makes 5 nominations, they get rejected during that time, then we go on to the next step. Or if he or she refuses to make a nomination, 30 days ends, we go on to whatever the next step is.
Next step.
Right. So
Okay, I'd like to amend that just a little bit. After your 30 days for nominations, I'd like to have the mayor have at least 7 days before the next council meeting to do his nomination, because people need time to look at stuff. So, we don't want him immediately jumping in and nominating somebody right at the end of the 30-day period on the 31st day, because nobody's had time to look at the candidates.
Okay.
What was the reason for the 30-day? The second.
So the 30 days for you to get all the nominations, all the people that are interested. And then there should be a short time period after that 30 days for the council to review all the people that want to have the seat.
Right.
And then put a short time frame on you that after at least 7 days, that the next council meeting after that you have to nominate somebody.
I don't know if we need to put that in writing. If the mayor put someone up on day 31 and I didn't have a single minute to talk to anybody, I just vote no, because I think that would be inappropriate for the mayor to do that if the council wanted time to look at. So we could put it in writing, because Councilman Welch, I think you're right that we should have some time to look at it as well. But if the mayor tries to pull that and we all are like, no, we haven't looked at these yet. No, I'm nominating right now. I think we're just going to say no because we didn't have time to check it. I mean, that's what I would do, I think. But maybe, because otherwise this policy is going to get really long.
I think we would either say no or we'd table it to the next meeting so that we'd have, more time to consider. And so I guess I was understanding the mayor's proposal a little bit differently. I think it was the mayor's proposal, maybe it was the city attorney's proposal, in that we would have the original 30 days for the mayor to collect applications, and then he would have another 30 days in which during that 30-day period he needed to continue the process, either by making a nomination or declining a nomination, and setting a second 30-day time period in this policy for which the process would be continued by the mayor. I thought was the way that I was understanding that.
Yeah, I think that's what everybody was saying, but I was saying I think we should shorten that second 30 days.
Okay. You're thinking the 30 days is too long.
So if I understand what you're saying, then you would like a shorter time that says this is a review time. It has to be for people to vet these candidates, the council members to vet the candidates, and the mayor to vet the candidates, because I almost guarantee you after that 30-day nomination period or application period, the mayor's not going to have had time to vet those candidates, because he's going to get last-minute applications, and he's going to have vet things. So there's a vetting period. and maybe 15 days is the right time for the vetting period, and then the next 15 days has to be. Maybe that's the way.
Something along those lines, yes.
That's one idea down there.
But not a full 30 days for the vetting period.
I don't mind adding some vetting period, but I would still seeing how procedurally the agenda could be packed. There could be a snowstorm delaying the meeting. There's just it's too narrow of a window to make the time that the mayor has to bring that nomination to the table only 15 days. I would ask that period be 30 days, whether or not it includes a 15-day vetting period. It just give them a whole month, because you could potentially reduce your meetings to one meeting a month for some reason. So to at least give them 2 opportunities within a month to get that done.
Maybe that could be a preference note in the policy, that the vetting would be the first 15 days of the nomination and not a requirement. I don't know if that works in these kind of things.
Yeah.
I am a little worried if we notch it down to 15-day things. There's just going to be something that's going to happen. The mayor's going to get sick and can't be there, and whatever. I mean, who knows? So I think a little more flexibility there. I think Councilman Welch, you think that we need a little time to vet. I totally agree with that. I'm just worried about chopping these up into such small time increments.
Right.
Yeah, and we talked about the scenario where we get only 1 or 2 applicants, but we could also have a scenario where we get 20 or 30 applicants, which could take a substantial amount of time to review and vet, especially if you're meeting and having a conversation with every person that applied and you're coordinating their schedule with your schedule. That I know from my experience talking with the folks that applied to fill our last vacancy, that getting schedules just right and coordinating a time for everyone to discuss things can elapse calendar days rather quickly.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just trying to get the process moving as fast as possible.
Yeah. I mean, the last process, I think, from the time the mayor opened the nomination to when the mayor accepted or nominated his first candidate was about 50 days, maybe. It wasn't terribly long, and we had about 7 applicants in the beginning, so it could be done in a 60-day window. Kind of after hearing this, I'll put all this into a format. It sounds like the last item I had on here, I haven't heard anybody support this, but it was something that came up in our last conversation. Like I said, the path we're on seems to be a tiered system where the mayor makes a nomination, and if that person fails, then it'd be offered to the next highest vote getter. And if that wasn't an option, then there would be some form of special election, possibly if we can do mail-in or something cheaper. Otherwise it would go to a standard special election. But something that had come, I'm sorry.
I think you might have meant this, but I assume the mayor can nominate more than one person if he'd like. It's just when he stops nominating.
Yes.
Then it goes.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that clarification. That's really important, that the mayor, sounds like everybody agrees that the mayor retains the right to nominate in this process. But something that came up that was kind of a sticking point and that was not clear, that I need kind of clarity on, is there was some confusion about whether the mayor had to present all the names. Now, I know the conversation we've had has been different, but do you all see a scenario where you would require the mayor to present all the nominations to the governing body no matter what? Because then we could amend the language, take out the nomination part, and basically have the mayor read off those names. I'm seeing people shake their heads, but that was such a big issue that I kind of need some guidance on that.
I could see why the old policy it could be seen that way, and I guess I would just like to clarify it the way we ended up doing it, kind of. I guess we need to have better clarity there, because there was a lack of clarity, but I would move towards saying, no, the mayor he doesn't have to nominate people he doesn't want to recommend, because, if he doesn't want to recommend them, he shouldn't have to. You're almost like forcing him to vote for someone he doesn't want to vote for. And I don't think that should be the way the policy is. But the policy needs to be more clear, because it was not clear before, for sure.
I agree with that. I think that the policy can be more clear on that. What we've talked about isn't a policy that it requires the mayor to read through whatever list of names is submitted. If we wanted to do a process like that, I think I would ask that we take the mayor out of the process completely and ask the city clerk to administrate that process, because it wouldn't really be the mayor's nomination in my mind, which is a different way that we could go about it. But I don't think that's really what I would recommend at this point.
Yeah, but if you let somebody else do it, whose name comes first?
Well, yeah, that's kind of the whole point of the whole issue, right? There's the issue of presenting all who the candidates are, and then there's the nominating of them. The lack of clarity between those two things is what the problem was.
Right.
So are you saying he should just read off all these people submitted themselves and then say, this is who I'm nominating?
I think he's saying that could have been understood that way in the past, and I agree it could have been understood that way in the past, and we need to make sure it either doesn't say that or it does say that, but we're not going to be, no one in future councils have to debate on whether it's one way or the other.
Right.
And I might just try to clarify here. I think there is a difference in my mind between the mayor announcing who has applied and reading off the names and making everyone aware of who has applied, and the mayor reading off the names to be voted on one at a time, systematically going through the list of applicants.
Right, but that's not what happened, because my contention was that the mayor identified all the candidates as excellent potential council members, and at that point, I took that. I understood that to mean that they all could be voted on. That's different than he didn't just list who the candidates are. He started promoting all of them together as, hey, any one of these people would be great for the city. That's what the mayor presented it.
Yeah, and if he
that was my sticking point.
And if he said that, that probably was a mistake, because I think he probably, I'm going to say, if I was him, I'd say a former mayor I wouldn't nominate. So I probably shouldn't say something like they would be a great candidate, because I don't actually think they're a great candidate, because I wouldn't nominate a former mayor if I were the mayor. So maybe we could say Mayor Benaj, in trying to say nice, being really kind to everyone and saying nice things about everyone, kind of got us helped with the confusion, which unclear policy just the confusion was rolling, and maybe that didn't help. But hopefully we can just end all that worries by having a better policy.
But clarity helps.
Right.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying.
And when I was saying what I was saying about the difference there, I wasn't actually even trying to refer to this last attempt to fill the council vacancy. I really just wanted to, as we talk about what we're proposing going forward, be clear when we've used the phrase reading off the list of candidates, I think very liberally in our discussion. And so I just wanted to draw attention to the reading the list of candidates phrase might be a little ambiguous for this discussion. And I wanted to maybe get a little bit of clarity on when we say that, what do we mean, so that we don't get into a situation where we're working through this policy in a future council meeting trying to fill a vacancy and we all have a different understanding of what that meant.
Right. Right. And
There's no reason for repeating this policy. That's right.
Right. And we're going to clarify the policy, but as you know, next time the target will be somewhere else in the policy that we thought was clear as day, and the next group will say, well, that wasn't clear. But we're going to clarify it in the areas that come up just as best we can. I think just by having these conversations, a lot of times your attorney or whoever's interested will go back and watch the video and to see what the intent was at the time. So just by having this conversation, you've done a lot to clear up those conversations in the future that we can't predict what, the sticking point will be. But there will be something, and it will be new.
So Councilmember Hilltop, I want to make sure I understand what your thoughts are as we move forward on this. What is your opinion on for the policy going forward as we look to fill council vacancies in the future? Should the mayor be required to put forward to a vote everyone that's applied for the council to vote on, or are you preferring that he not be required to do that?
I guess if the policy is clear, then the mayor not being required to nominate everybody that applies is fine.
Okay. I wasn't. I just wanted to clarify. I wasn't 100% sure, just based on the line of discussion. I thought that's where you were at, but I wanted to make sure I understood your thoughts there.
This has been helpful.
So,
Okay, so we have a consensus, we can get enough information, Jackie, to move forward, or?
I have a couple of other questions.
Okay.
Maybe back to page 1, when we look at that first paragraph on the 120-day period, two things. One question is, it says that the amount of vacancies on the governing body jeopardize or actually prohibit the ability of the governing body to reach a quorum, then the city clerk shall make provisions to hold a special election. Mm-hmm. Actually prohibit is really clear to me, but jeopardize seems a bit subjective, and I'd like to understand who determines if it is in jeopardy. If we could clarify that, I think that would be useful here. Or just remove jeopardize altogether. I don't know what your thoughts are on that. And then the second comment on this paragraph would be, I wonder if we might be able to enact the same tiered system we're filling that seat here, or if that wouldn't make sense because there would be too many vacancies. In other words, should one seat be filled by going to the last election first before we would resort to the special election, just because based on the discussion here, we all desire to avoid the special election process if possible.
What was the paragraph you were looking at for that first point?
It is paragraph 3 in the policy statement in red. It starts with if at any point.
Actually, the third paragraph down from the top.
So, really, something that's a question for the city attorney. I think on what our thoughts are there, and maybe it's not something that we need to answer right now. But I did want to just throw out those couple of thoughts on one. Jeopardize seems just a little bit subjective to me, and so if we are going to have a subjective criteria, I'd like to be clear as to who evaluates that criteria, so that that's clear. And then, secondly, to consider, might there be a way to incorporate that tiered process as part of the vacancy being filled if the quorum is in jeopardy?
I think jeopardy might be like a catastrophic situation. You get a tornado comes through here and wipes out three council members or something like that. You know, hope we never ever have anything like that. But, you know.
Right. And my concern there is I think we could all imagine different scenarios where that might apply. And those scenarios are probably all very different. And in the spirit of being clear here, I just wanted to call that out. And then I guess to change the line item just a little bit, a final concern is on item D on the second page where it says majority vote is needed to confirm an appointment. I guess I have a question on majority vote. Is that of the council members present for the meeting or the council members currently serving? Is any clarity needed there? I'm wondering about if somebody is absent from a meeting but is still technically part of the council, what does that mean for this line item?
Okay, so I'll start with your first question. The jeopardize on the first page we need some I see that as appropriately vague. We need some sort of general, like, oh, we didn't think of that, and this is enough jeopardy where we want to use this to be able to keep the governing body intact. I mean, it would be a good faith kind of thing, but I do agree with you. So just to say, I would like that to remain subjective just because we never know. But I do think that it would be helpful to determine who should decide whether that's in jeopardy. Whether it's the governing body or, you know, if we don't have a majority, I don't know if the governing body can decide that. So that might be something to.
I might propose that it should be our city manager. The city manager is somebody that's the direct employee of the council. We hire and contract that person every year directly as the council. That could make sense.
Yeah.
Or
City, can we say city manager or his designee?
Just
Our feed is kind of losing. Councilmember Smith, do you mind repeating what you said?
Oh, I was just saying that I think it could make sense for that person to be our city manager, since that person is directly employed by the council, and we renew and confirm that contract and that hiring decision every year. Or potentially our city judge. Our judge is someone who we would expect to be impartial, and also is an appointment that's concerned or confirmed by the city council every single year. Those would be a couple of ideas that I might have.
Okay. I think that would be good. I think that it's good that you have those two. I think I'd work with those. I would even say the city manager, judge, or the city manager's designee. Sometimes you have a city where all the appointed people are kicked off, the mayor runs away, everybody, you know, and you have left with less than a quorum, and you may need the city clerk to make that decision only in her capacity as a designee for the city manager at that time. Those are really weird cases, but if you could consider the city manager or the designee for that position, and then those other two.
Those are just my thoughts. I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts there.
I think it's good to have somebody who makes that determination. I think that's fine. Yeah.
I'm fine with what you're saying. I don't have any strong thoughts. Another question I had, Jackie, on same area. The majority
Dr. Schroeder,
votes
before
need
we
to
move to
confirm.
that, I'm sorry, Dr. Schroeder, before we move to that, I wanted to address Councilmember Smith's second question, if that's okay. Then we can move to yours. It was the majority vote is needed to confirm an appointment. That was just a holdover from whether in some of our, at least a couple of our requirements, 50-50 goes in favor of the way the vote was called. It gets weird. So it's just a clarifying statement that it has to be a majority. It can't be, I vote not to nominate and, half vote not to nominate, then the opposite wins. So we just wanted we wanted it to be clear.
I think the question, though, is what constitutes the majority? Is it a quorum of the body, or is it the majority of those present?
That would revert to our, unless like certain items you need a 2/3 majority. So it would revert to our, I can't remember if that's our rules of order or our council meeting rules of order, or just our standard ordinance. We have a definition for majority where there's no other definition, which is it would be 2 out of 5 council members. Not 2, 3 out of 5 council members would be a regular majority, which often acts as a 2/3 majority. But you can make it something different if you want.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to have the majority requirement. In the situation where we have a vacancy, the most that we will have is 4 council members. If one council member were to be absent for that meeting, I would wonder, how that would affect the calculation of what a majority is as it, pertains to this agreement, and how the mayor's voting in this agreement would also affect that majority vote calculation. And I just want to make sure that we have a way to get clarity on that, whether that's in this policy or in our, rules of order. I just want to make sure that we're all clear on what the requirements are there.
Okay. So standard majority for you all is members present, and it would include the mayor if he were breaking the tie. So are you okay with that, or would you want it to be something different? I can write that clearly in here, that it would be a majority of council members, and if the mayor were voting, you would need him included in that as well.
I I'm okay with the way it is. It sounds like, Jackie, you're pretty clear on what a majority vote is, and you're not having any trouble knowing exactly what that is. So maybe Councilman Smith and even I wouldn't have been able to clearly been like, oh, that means this. But it sounds like you know exactly what that means, and there's not any ambiguity. Is that right?
That's right. I can reference it though, because if you want to look it up, we can have it there. So, good point.
I think the majority of those present makes sense. So
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure that that's what that meant.
Okay, I'll put that there too. Got it. Dr. Schroeder, you have
And then we
something.
decide the mayor wants to tie or not.
Decide what?
Did we come up with whether we wanted the mayor to break a tie or not? At this point in time, since we're talking about a majority, if it's 2-2, and does the mayor vote and make it 3-2, or does the mayor not vote and it stays tied? And
I think most of us said okay with the mayor breaking the tie. So unless that was kind of the direction I thought we went, I'm certainly open to opening that back up and discussing it more.
Yeah.
it's just been so long, I don't remember. I guess.
Yeah, I heard three in favor of that at that time.
Okay.
3 council members
Okay.
supported that idea earlier.
Good.
Okay. So I think we've hit that. Mr. Mayor, if there's no other questions, I can definitely come back with an updated policy that spells all that out, and we can hash through that.
I had that question. It says majority vote is needed to confirm an appointment. Isn't it confirm a nomination? Is appointment the right word? Am I tripping over myself here?
Yeah. The mayor, the way I was thinking about that, the mayor nominates and the council appoints. So, I mean, we can to
Okay, so
confirm.
it's the council appointing. Yeah, okay, I get you.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean,
I
I can-
think you probably.
I can make it
that's all
sound
right.
more to confirm a candidate. How about that? That way we're putting it on a person rather than these terms that go back and forth. Yeah, that's easy. I can change that.
Call now. I see your name show up. I don't see your face, and you are muted, according to what I see on the screen.
Her mic is off.
Mic is off.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Any other discussion on this one? Let's go on to the next item then. Wrap this up.
Okay.
And that is this discussion about the term of the mayor. And like I stressed before, I really don't have a preference one way or the other on this. It was something that was discussed several months ago, and I thought, well, it might be something to consider. We just didn't have time at the time. I think they said, oh, it's too close to the election to do this. But now we have opportunity. We got an election coming up. If we want to put this on the ballot, now's the time to consider it for a ballot initiative. If we want to do this, or if we don't, well, that's fine with me too. If we do this, I would prefer that it would be a 2023 ballot in term that will start in 2023, and that way it moves it far enough away that I'm not trying to ingratiate. I don't really. Okay. But what does the council think? Do you want to pursue this, or do you want to get it wrong?
I was kind of leaving it up to you, but what I would say is if we put it on the ballot this year, it should be effective for next year. Otherwise, people are going to wonder why we're only voting on a 2-year after we just passed changing it to 4 years.
Well, a concern I might have with it being on this year's ballot is that I don't believe we'll have any other city offices on this year's ballot with it being a presidential election. And I think that it was somewhat intentional that council members are elected during years that are not the presidential elections. And so it might be more appropriate, in my opinion, for it to be a ballot question in 2021, potentially effective for the 2021 decision for whoever runs at that point in time. Of course, it wouldn't apply to whoever's currently in office, which would be Mayor Benage, unless you were to be reelected, and the ballot would be, confirmed in favor of a 4-year term.
Okay. Well, we can certainly wait until next year to consider it.
I'm wide open on whether it's 2023 or when we, I'm pretty open to that. I definitely think we should do this. The city needs to do this at some point. Having a new mayor come in every 2 years, I think is not only difficult for the mayor in the sense that he or she already has the pressure to, oh no, I have elections coming up, and he feels like he's ready to start. But I think it's actually quite a bit of annoyance for the staff, because my guess is the mayor has the most interaction with the staff, the city manager, he talks to them the most. If that person changes out quickly, we already have a little bit of knee jerk, and that's just the result of democracy, and it's fine. It's not the end of the world, but I think the 2 years creates a little bit more knee jerk. I think this was talked about during the time of Mayor Austin. It was discussed then, and I was totally in favor of it, just watching it then as well. I mean, whenever it gets put in place, I don't care that much, but I think it makes sense to switch it 2 to 4, or at least, give the people an option to vote on switching it 2 and 4.
Yeah, I like the idea of putting it on the 2021 ballot initiative, have the people vote, and also have it go active that year as well, so that who's ever running for mayor make it clear that you could be a 2 or a 4-year term depending on how the vote goes. I think the sooner the better that gets on the ballot, but I don't think this year is a good year to do it.
All right, we'll put it off till next year and reconsider. Would you want it on a primary ballot or on the November ballot?
I think I'd say the primary ballot, just because that gets the most people voting for it. I'm not so sure I'd want that on the primary.
Yeah, I think the traditional standard election, November ballot would make the most sense in my opinion. I realize that would mean that there wouldn't be an answer in advance of the November election, how long the mayor's term was going to be. That would be the advantage to putting it on the primary ballot, but I worry that not everyone that votes in the traditional city election in November would vote in the primary.
One of the problems you create, and I'm not opposed to this, just to make sure that you're aware of it, you make this 4-year term to begin in 2021, then you will always have it with 3 council members being reelected, and then the other 2 years will just be 2 council members being reelected. To 2023, you'd have council members being reelected up for election in 2021, and in 2023 you'd have 2 council members and a mayor up for election. It's just the cadence. That's all it is. I don't have, but okay.
That's the schedule, but if there's a vacancy, you still might be voting for 3.
Well, that's always possible. Yes.
That's a good point. I mean, that's the case for making it active in 2023.
Okay. Well, I think we're pretty much in agreement. We're going to wait next year, so maybe we should maybe consider this for a workshop like June or July of 2021. If it's a November ballot, you're going to have it in there by September, right? I think your date is always in September for a November ballot.
Correct.
Ballot.
Correct. Yes. Yep.
So I'm thinking June, July of next year, 2021. We need to workshop this again.
Yeah, I was going to say another reason that you wouldn't want to have it on a primary is because it's too late to get it come off the ballot anyway at that point. Once you're a candidate, that's it, right?
Well,
the gate is early in the year, so it wouldn't matter.
Yeah, you have to sign up by June 1st.
You'd have to commit to a 2 or 4-year term before getting on that, candidate list anyway. So,
right. Okay. All right. We'll table it till next year sometime. Okay. Thank you all for your time and attendance. Any other issues to discuss that we need to bring up? If not, I think we are adjourn. Everybody have a
Thanks,
great evening, and we will see you next Tuesday.
Yes, thank you.
Goodbye. Said I'm